Week 16 of the fantasy football season, and here's running back start sits every matchup. This week, the first matchup, Jacksonville Jaguars at the New York Jets. So Travis Etienne, I have him as a start this week. I know the last couple weeks the numbers haven't been up to snuff like they were a few weeks ago before they traded James Robinson away, but Travis Etienne, we know, is a talented running back. We know he's a guy that's got breakaway speed, and we know he's a good receiver out of the backfield. So this week here, I know the Jet defense is pretty decent this year, but Travis Etienne each and every week's locked in as a number 2 running back for your roster. Now to the Jets, Donovan Knight I have as a start. Looks like he's going to be the lead back over there in New York with Michael Carter sprinkled in a little bit on this offense. Donovan Knight, 2 out of 3 ball games, he's been pretty solid. So last week was just a down ball game for whatever reason with this Jet offense versus a pretty weak Lion defense where the running game couldn't get going. So Donovan Knight, I think, bounces back on Thursday Night Football, and I got him as a start. Michael Carter, I have as a sit. The workload's gone down. Maybe he's not 100% as well coming off the injury as Michael Carter. And this week, you can't trust him in a big spot, especially in the playoffs. So he's a sit. Now to the New Orleans Saints at the Cleveland Browns. Alvin Kamara, I know this season the numbers haven't been all that great, where he's been a Jekyll or Hyde, obviously, running back this year. But right now, he's a guy, Alvin Kamara, that still you're going to put in your starting lineup. Still putting up solid number 2 running back numbers for the most part this season. And this week here, I like the matchup where this could be a close contested game where we could see Kamara get a lot of dump-offs and we could see him get a decent amount of carries as well. So this week, he's a start for me. Now to the Brown side of things, Nick Chubb's a start, but he's not as great as he was early in the season. Ever since Deshaun Watson's back from suspension, they've been throwing the football more here as this Cleveland Brown team. And Nick Chubb here, the carries have gone down, and even the opportunities in the red zone have gone down here for him. But this week, I'm still putting him in the starting lineup, and I think he could bounce back with a good ball game at home for this Brown team. And they got to establish the run more, in my opinion. Now that Kareem Hunt is back up running back, he's a sit for me. This season's been a disappointment, no doubt about it, for Kareem Hunt, where many seasons he's been a fantasy factor, but this year it just hasn't come to fruition for Kareem Hunt, and I'm surprised they didn't try to trade him at the deadline and get something for him. So this season, he's a sit for most weeks. Once again, he's a sit in this one in Nick Chubb. But next season, if he lands after free agency with a team that needs a starting running back, he's definitely a guy that'll have number 2 running back value in fantasy next year. Now to the Falcons at the Baltimore Ravens. Cordell Patterson and Algier last week, for the most part, split in the backfield. And both those guys had decent fantasy days. But this week, versus the Baltimore Ravens, I can't trust them. And I also can't trust how the workload is going to go in this Atlanta Falcon backfield. So Patterson, even after coming off a touchdown in a decent game, I can't start him in this one. And Algier, we didn't see much of a workload until last week. We had 17 carries for 139 yards. But even in this one, where they're going to be trailing in this one for the most part early and often, I think the numbers are going to be down versus a decent Baltimore unit versus the run this week. And I got them both as sits, especially in a crucial Week 16 game. It's tough to trust running backs in the Falcons each and every week. Now to the Ravens, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, both borderline guys. J.K. Dobbins, he's been back the last few weeks now, and he's putting up fantasy numbers, but another guy very injury prone, and he could go down any time for fantasy owners in this Raven team, and you don't want that, obviously, in the final 4 of your fantasy game this week in the playoffs. So Dobbins, I have as a borderline option. I think he could have a good game, no doubt, versus a middle of the pack Falcon defense, but everyone's playing this week, obviously, and the bye weeks are over. So Dobbins, at best, he's in the top 24 or less at the running back position. And Gus Edwards, he's been a decent running back, but another guy with injury problems. In the last few weeks, the numbers have gone down. Only anywhere from 7 to 10 carries he's been getting, Gus Edwards. So now with Dobbins back and healthy another week, possibly, I can't trust him more as a borderline option, because if he's not getting goal line work and a touchdown, he's pretty much getting 8 to 10 fantasy points max. Now to the Bengals at the New England Patriots. Joe Mixon I have as a start this week here. I know his numbers haven't been great this season as Joe Mixon, but he's still a guy that could pop off anytime. Well, we saw it early in the season where he had over 50 fantasy points with 5 touchdowns in one game. I'm not saying that's happening, obviously, here versus a good New England Patriot defense, but Joe Mixon's still a guy that could put up fantasy numbers. He's just not putting up the numbers where most owners drafted him this season in the first or second round, but he's a start. And now to the Patriots, from Andre Stevenson, it's been a solid year for him. Good running back, 3 down back, no doubt about it. And Damian Harris, even if he comes back, there's no reason why this coaching staff should have Stevenson split with Harris, or even a 60-40 thing in Stevenson's favor. So this week, Stevenson was healthy, came back, played well versus the Raiders, even though I don't know why he tried that little lateral at the end. But anyway, he's a start for me. And Damien Harris, even if he's back in this game, what is he really going to do? 5 to 8 touches he should only get as a change of pace guy. Because in my opinion, Stevenson's a workhorse, and he could do it all: block, catch out of the backfield, and obviously run between the tackles. So Harris is a sit. Now to the Buffalo Bills at the Chicago Bears. Singletary I have as a start. I know this backfield the last couple weeks, they've been switching off who's having the better fantasy day and getting more touches. Last week it was Cook, and this week here I think Devin Singletary is going to get back most of the workload here for this Buffalo Bill team. And he's been a solid number 2 flex option for the majority of the season, is Devin Singletary. So this week here at the Chicago Bears, I think he carves out a decent ball game, and I got him as a start. And now to James Cook, he could go the either way as well. We saw some games where he's got 15 fantasy points, and then some games where he's only getting 4 or 5 touches. So James Cook, it's been up and down for him. But next season, I think he'll definitely be a fantasy factor and a guy who could break out next year. But is this week he's a borderline option, because I just don't know how it's going to shake out in that backfield. Now to the Bears side of things, Montgomery and Khalil Herbert, who got activated off IR. I both had sits in this one. Buffalo's defense is good versus the run. Even though I know Raheem Mostert ran over 100 yards last week, I think they were selling out, obviously, on stopping Tyreek Hill and Waddle and having the running game try to beat him. But Montgomery last week had a great game, but he usually don't put 2 great games in a row together. So this week here, I got Montgomery as a sit and Herbert is a sit. And obviously, if they're going to be chasing points early and often in Chicago, it's going to be Fields running, if anything. So they're both sits for me this week. Now to the Giants at the Minnesota Vikings. Both these running backs are top 10 running backs this season in fantasy points. Both putting up numbers, especially over the last couple weeks. And Saquon Barkley, it was great to see him last week have a good ball game versus the Washington Commanders. One of his better games in the last month, so maybe he's got the juice back. Almost playoff time here with the Giants are trying to get in to that wild card, where right now they definitely got a spot as the 6th seed, and Barkley versus a mediocre Minnesota defense. He's the definite start this week. And Dalvin Cook, the last few weeks, the numbers have gone up. And last week in the historic comeback from this Minnesota Viking team, Dalvin Cook in that second half of the game was doing a lot. Had a 40-yard run, had a 54-yard touchdown off a screen for a TD. And this week here versus the New York Giants, I think he has a good game. Once again, they need to start pretty much each and every week. Now to the Lions at the Panthers, DeAndre Swift I have as a start. He's been getting healthy as the week's gone on. And this Lion team's on some hot streak right now. So DeAndre Swift looks like he's the man over there in the backfield. So he's a start for me versus a mediocre Panther defense. And Jamal Williams, I know he's got 15 touchdowns this season, but if he's not scoring touchdowns, he's not putting up numbers, and still he's maxing out pretty much at 10 fantasy points. So this week here, I'm not going to roll the dice with everyone playing, obviously, and no more bye weeks anymore in a playoff game with Jamal Williams. If you don't find the end zone, it's only going to get 2 or 3 points. So this week, if you want to play him, that's fine, but at best he's a borderline option if you don't have many decent options this week. Now to the Panthers, Foreman and Hubert are both borderline guys for me. I know Foreman the last 2 weeks, he's been benchable for sure, not putting up numbers, but for some reason in this one, I think he could be a physical runner and have a decent game versus this Detroit Lion team. But I'm not saying go out there and start him 100%, but if you don't have great options, he's a borderline flex number 2 back to me. And Chuba Hubbard, I know he's a good receiver out of the backfield, but this ball game, we'll see how it goes. It definitely could be a grinded out game where it's a lot of running the football for this Panther team, where they want to keep the ball out of Darnold's hands and not have him throw 30, 40 times in this one. So Foreman and Hubert, both borderline guys. But obviously, if this game gets out of hand, then they got to chase points. I think Hubbard could have a decent one. Now to the Seahawks at the Chiefs here. Kenneth Walker, great rookie season here for him. I know last week wasn't a great game for Kenneth Walker, but he's still a guy you can put in your starting lineup each and every week. And I think he's going to get more receptions out of the backfield as well, especially with Lockett out. Someone's got to pick up that workload. I know Marquise Goodwin is going to step in, but I think Walker's good for a couple receptions out of the backfield in this one. And he's a start for me. Now to the Chiefs, Pacheco and McKinnon are both starts. Pacheco, he's been a solid in between the tackle guy, and definitely way better than Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's been this season. I know Hilaire got off to a hot start, but he was a touchdown-dependent guy, and they really hasn't missed a beat with Hilaire. Injured the last few weeks with the ankle injury. So Pacheco in this one, I think he could get 70, 80 yards and find the end zone. And now Jerry McKinnon, he's been a top running back over the last 2 weeks with over 30 fantasy points in each of the ball games here for Jerick McKinnon. So this week here versus a mediocre Seattle unit and a team we saw Christian McCaffrey take big advantage of last week, even though I'm not comparing them. But obviously it's a high-powered offense and Mahomes has trust in Jerick McKinnon out of the backfield. So this week, once again, there's no way you could bench him, and he's a start. Now to the Texans, at the Titans, Rex Burkhead and Dare Agudale, they're both sits for me. We know Pierce is out for the season, but next year, Pierce, he's going to be a solid running back once again, 3rd or 4th round. I'm projecting him to go in fantasy leagues, but these guys you can't trust versus a pretty solid Tennessee defense that did a decent job on Austin Eckler last week. So now to Derrick Henry, start him each and every week. He's been a fantasy monster once again. 1st round pick, no doubt, next season in fantasy drafts. And the last time these two division rivals met, he went over 200 yards, is Henry. So he's a must-start once again. Now to the Commanders at the 49ers. Gibson and Brian Robinson are both sits for me. We saw last week versus a Giant defense that isn't great versus the run. These guys not really do much for fantasy owners, especially Gibson, under 4 fantasy points in that ball game. So right now, I know Brian Robinson's the lead dog, but this is a tough matchup at the 49ers, where they're most likely going to be chasing points early and often is this Washington Commander team. So in a tough playoff game, and what I saw last week, obviously from both these guys in a Week 16 fantasy playoff game, I can't trust them. And this, it's Christian McCaffrey. It don't matter the matchup. He's a top 1 or 2 running back weekly for fantasy owners. He's a start. And Jordan Mason, he's been a guy closing out ball games in the 4th quarter the last drive or two, where he's a physical running back and the fresh legs tiring, defense is out, and Kyle Shanahan said his time is coming, but right now I don't think the time is now for him in fantasy lineups. So he's a sit for me for Jordan Mason, but definitely next season he's a guy to look out for and draft in the later rounds of your leagues. Now to the Eagles at the Cowboys. Miles Sanders, I know last week a huge disappointment and a bust out of a game under 2 fantasy points, but this week here in a matchup at the Cowboys where Minshew is most likely going to be starting, the way it's looking for Jalen Hurts, they're going to run the football a lot here, and they're going to rely on Miles Sanders, I believe. They're not going to want Minshew throwing the football 30 or 40 times. So right here, Miles Sanders has a good track record in his career versus the Cowboys, and even after coming off a bad ball game last week, I give him the starting nod this week. Now to the Cowboys, Zeke Elliott and Pollard, best 1-2 combo in the backfield in football this season, I believe, on the same team. So Elliott, the short yardage guy, still a guy that's physical in between the tackles and has some juice left. He's a star for me in this one. And Tony Pollard, the home run hitter and a good receiver out of the backfield, where I think the Cowboys got to get him a little more involved. Last week they went away from him in that ball game that they blew with the Jacksonville Jaguars for a little bit, and that's what might have caused them. But this week they both start in a huge division matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Now to the Raiders at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pretty straightforward. Josh Jacobs, one of the better running backs and breakout running backs this season. He's a start. This Steelers defense not all that great. Josh Jacobs, he's doing it all pretty much for the Raiders. Him and Devontae Adams, the whole offense. And he's a big physical running back with burst-away speed as well, is Jacobs. And he's a start this week. And Najee Harris, I know he's a first-round pick in most fantasy leagues, and he's been a bust where he was picked. But in terms of putting up numbers, he's still a number 2 running back for fantasy owners this season, where he's getting 12, 15 fantasy points weekly. And this week here, I see a game log once again for Najee Harris with that. And Jaylen Warren, I know he's starting to get more work over the last few weeks, but he's still not a guy I could trust, especially in a fantasy playoff game. So he's a sit for me. Now to the Packers at the Dolphins. Aaron Jones, he's been a great fantasy player once again this season, and definitely a guy who's falling down the draft boards when the drafts came around. But next season, he's a 2nd, 3rd rounder minimum is Aaron Jones next year. He's a start in this one. This Miami run defense ain't all that great. And the Packers here, if they want to keep 2 and the high-powered receivers in Hill and Waddle off the field, I think they're going to run the football a lot, and they got a nice 1-2 combo going as well. Now to A.J. Dillon, the first 7-8 weeks of the season, he was non-existent for fantasy owners, but the last 3 or 4 weeks here, Dillon's getting more carries once again. He's been a big physical running back, and he's definitely putting up serviceable fantasy numbers, is Dillon. But this week here, I think that train ends a little bit, and I got him as a borderline option because he's obviously still splitting the backfield with Jones. Jones, the more dynamic running back. And this week here at the Dolphins, I think the game plan is going to be try to stop the run and have Rodgers try to beat us. Now to the Dolphins side of things, Jeff Wilson, if he's back in this game, needs a sit. He's been a disappointment over the last few weeks, and I know he missed last week's game at Buffalo, but I think he returns in this one versus Green Bay, and it's going to be a split once again. So Raheem Mostert, I know, was a great game for him, and a surprising game for him, going over 100 yards versus one of the best run defenses in the league in the Buffalo Bills. But this week here versus the Green Bay Packers, especially if Wilson's back, I can't trust him on his own, and he's a sit now to the Broncos. At the Los Angeles Chargers, I got Latavius Murray as a sit. I know he went over 100 yards in last week's ball game, but I don't know if he's going to do it once again. And this game here could be a slot fest, no doubt about it, with the Broncos at the Los Angeles Chargers, with Brett Rypien possibly starting once again. Obviously, this Bronco team plays better at home, but doesn't travel great on the road. So right now, Murray's look good, no doubt about it. He's been definitely one of the better pickups in fantasy football, but this week I got a feeling he's not going to do much here versus Los Angeles Ram team. And I got him as a sit now to his counterpart, Marlon Mack. He's been coming on over the last couple weeks here for this Denver Bronco team, but he's still not a guy I could have confidence in a fantasy playoff game to put in my starting lineup, unless you're in a 16-team league or deeper or something where you got no choice and you got injuries where you got to put Marlon Mack in there. But Marlon Mack definitely is a bench stash for your fantasy roster, because if Latavius Murray goes down in the next week or two, he's a guy you can put in your lineup. But this week he's a sit. And now to the Rams side of things, at least Cam Akers, the last few weeks, he's putting up some decent numbers for this Los Angeles Ram team, but he's still not a guy I could trust 100% to put in my fantasy lineup. And this Bronco defense is one of the brighter spots on this team this season. So Akers is a sit, and Kyren Williams, a lot of people thought he was going to be a guy that was going to have an expanded workload, but obviously that hasn't been the case here for Kyren Williams. So this week, in a pretty tough matchup versus a good defense, and a guy not really getting work, he's an easy sit. Now to the Bucs at the Arizona Cardinals. Leonard Fournette, one of the better running backs over the last couple seasons, even though I know this year his numbers are taking a dip, and now Rachaad White's pretty much splitting with him over the last month of the season. But Fournette's still going to get 10-15 fantasy points. Last week he outscored White 1150 fantasy point to 5 fantasy points. And this week here in a good matchup versus a weak Arizona defense, I like both running backs. Fournette as being the short yardage guy and a guy who could get a couple catches out of the backfield, and Rachaad White being that dynamic guy and a good receiver out of the backfield. So they both start for me. I think they both could get 10 plus fantasy points as number 2 running back flex options. And like I said, it's a good matchup at Arizona. Now to the Cardinals, James Conner, ever since he's come back from injury multiple weeks ago, he's been pretty solid, and he's a solid number 2 running back as Conner. Last season had a great year with 14 touchdowns, and this season he's been playing good. I know Colt McCoy's banged up, and McCoy might be the starting quarterback in this ball game, but James Conner still could catch a lot of cheap balls out of the backfield in PPR leagues and get that goal line touchdown. So he's a start. And now to the final game of Week 16. Los Angeles Chargers at the Colts Monday Night Football. Austin Ekeler, one of the best running backs once again this season. He's a first-round pick, no doubt, next year. And he's a start this week. Last week, I know the numbers weren't as great as they usually are for Ekeler, but this week I think he has a big ball game at the Indianapolis Colts, a team that can't stop no one, obviously, on defense after blowing a 33-point lead and losing last week to the Vikings. Now to the Colts, Jonathan Taylor, we know he's out for the season. The next season, he's probably a second or third rounder. At worst, here is Taylor for fantasy football. But now Zach Moss and Deion Jackson, next man up. I know Moss got 24 carries in last week's game, but this week here, if they're trailing early and often, I think Moss is going to get obviously more than 15 carries in this one. But it's going to be a 50-50 split with Moss getting short yardage and probably first and second down back on most drives here work. And Deion Jackson getting the receiving work out of the backfield. And a guy who can run between the tackles as well. We saw it early in the season when Jackson had to fill in, and he actually had a 28-point fantasy game. But this week here, I can't trust them in this game. And it's going to probably be a 50-50 split. So that's running back start sits every matchup of Week 16 of the fantasy football season.